out my bobbin thread. Okay, and now I'm going to take a second. I can because I had extra room, and if you have a table that isn't long enough, our table's long enough, but I don't want to move my sewing machine, what I did is I simply taped. Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Quilter's Apothecary. We are finally back. We had a big show in Kansas City that it took me about 2.5 weeks to prep for because I was teaching a dozen or so classes. And so that always takes a little bit of time to prep for that. So I know that you've been patient waiting for our last installment for our wonderful Kaleidoscope quilt. So on our last episode, our last part of our tutorial, what we did is we went ahead and we glued down everything around the actual true panel, right? So we took our other parts, and I know you know what I meant if you've been following. If you don't understand what I mean, then that's because you have to start with previous videos. So there we go. So we've got everything glued down. Now my next process, or part of the process for me, is going to be going around and actually sewing and stabilizing the edge of the frame that's around the piece itself. So that'll be the next part that we're going to be doing. We're going to be going over to the machine. I'm going to be doing that. I'll show you a little bit about how I do it. I like to use a zigzag stitch. I also like to use an invisible thread on top. You don't have to, but I just find that using an invisible thread on top, and I like monopoly from Superior. It comes in smoke, it comes in clear. I always tell people, and most long armors know this because they do this for a lot of ditch work when they're doing machine quilting. But the smoke is typically 95 to 99% of the time what people are normally going to use. The clear typically is only used for like white fabrics. The smoke is nice for color because it blends right into absolutely every different color that you could possibly have. It is a mono polyester invisible thread. That means that it's going to be a little safer if it encounters any heat of any sort. A lot of the invisible threads out there are actually made of nylon, i.e. fish line. And even though they try to make some of the nylons heat resistant, it's over time, I just don't have the faith that it is what it would like to be, that we all wish it would be. So nonetheless, if you're looking for a good invisible, that's what I'm using. Now remember, I'm only using that on the top when we go to the machine. I am still using my poly because I like poly thread. I'm using a poly 40, which is an isocord, which is actually an embroidery thread. I like to use that for my piecing for most things. I do tend to use also for the piecing, I do like to also use Filtech has a Cairo, I believe is what it's called. And that's a really nice piecing thread as well. And of course, Superior also has the, what is that, Rich? That Masterpiece. That's another good one that a lot of people like to use. I just find that the Cairo is priced better, and frankly, I find it to be pretty close to the quality of the Masterpiece. So that being said, so here we are. We've got everything glued. Now we still have, let me flip this over. And you'll notice I've actually already done some stitching here. So I've got a little bit of this done, but I'm going to actually, I left some undone to actually go over in the video. And we do have some overhang that will have to be trimmed once we actually finish the process of showing you how I'm doing this over at the machine. So we're going to set up over by the machine, and then I will show you the next step at the machine. And then I'm also going to show you, I believe we can probably do a completion on the quilt top in this episode. I will then show you the next process for the background, which I actually have prepped. We'll get there shortly. Let's head over to the machine. Okay, so we're at the machine. So I've got my thread all situated. I have pulled up my bobbin. I have my machine set for zigzag. I am running the HQ Stitch 710. Doesn't matter, whatever yours is what you'll use. I need a zigzag. I am running my zigzag width at 2.5 and I'm running my distance at 2.0. So just so you know, that's kind of how I'm running it. Now, as we look here, I have already done this section. I am relocking on to come down and finish the bottom portion. I wanted to flip this over here again to show you we've got our zigzag right on the edge. So everything's there. This is going to be trimmed away shortly. That'll be our next step once I finish this bottom portion. Okay, now I'm going to flip this down. We're back here. I have, like I said, pulled up my bobbin thread. Okay, and now I'm going to take a second. I've been away from my machine for a few weeks. Let me get some of the weight up here and off of here. What I'm going to do, because I've already done the straight sides, so now we're going to follow the zigzag portion up and down that we glued on from the hexagon kaleidoscope blocks that are attached to the panel itself. So we're going to come up to the top, pause, come down. You don't want to rush through this. You want to get it as nice as you possibly can. You also don't want to do any pulling and distorting to pull that needle and possibly have a needle break, right? And remember, we attached this down initially in the last tutorial with the acorn glue. So it's nice and pliable. It's not going to be hard and crusty. So let me get that going. Now what I'm doing is I'm making sure that I'm not stretching. It's very easy to kind of pull this taut, and then what's going to happen, especially because we've got some bias here, is that things can stretch, which is going to give you fullness. So I don't want to do that. I want to keep it not taut. I'm going to come up to that point, and now I'm going to stop. I'm going to raise my foot. At least on my machine, that's how that works. I'm going to turn it. I'm not going to try to pivot around with my foot down. I'm going to actually go ahead and turn. And again, I'm not doing any stretching. Now I'm kind of right there near a thick seam, so I'm going to lift that up a little bit, go right down into there. Now I can lower and raise with my needle down. Remember, you want to make sure your needle's down when you do your turning and adjusting. Got to work that large portion of that quilt through there. Again, there's a lot of bulk. We don't want to sew quilt to quilt accidentally and have a flip under. So you want to make sure to kind of test around, make sure you don't have anything under there. Okay, so there we go. Again, rather than pull and stretch, I'm going to go ahead and just gently pull up and just get past that particular thick seam. And so I'm going to continue. I would continue all the way around. Now remember, when I quilt this, I'm also going to stabilize it on the edge. What this is doing is just locking it down so everything's good and safe as I continue to pull this quilt top together. Now, a lot of you may have decided as you were working on your piece, okay, and I missed my corner there. So let me do my back up there, reposition, there we go. Again, you're using invisible thread. Again, I came to a thicker seam, so I'm going to lift my foot just a wee bit. Okay. turn, and pivot. Now let me get back to what I was saying. What was I saying? Right, so some of you are going to whatever you've got at this point for the quilt top, you're done. I have decided that I want mine on some background, and I chose a beautiful blue velvet material because it's going to be a beautiful art wall hanging. So that I'm going to show you next. If you choose to mount this piece, whatever that is, to something, and because of the oddball shape of my quilt, I actually have to do the same thing that we did with mounting the frame to the panel. For me, it's going to be the same process, gluing to the velvet, making sure that it's straight, and then doing this same process to attach it to the outer border, and then of course trimming away the excess in the back. And I'll show you that in just a short time here. Okay, so I'm going to continue around. This is what you're going to do. You're just going to take your time, make sure you have your needle stop in the down position, or lower your needle if you have an older machine that you're using that does not have the needle down feature. And you're just going to continue all the way around. So we'll be back once that's done, and I'll show you the next step. Okay, so we have everything sewn down. It's ready to trim the excess, as you see here. I've already started. I've got it 3/4 of the way done. Now, when I did the bottom portion, I forgot to make sure that I didn't overlap and fabric was folded under. Remember, we've got all of this fullness here that can flip over while we're sewing the other side. So again, I just trimmed away, left that. That's not going to be a problem. It's just a layer of fabric. No big deal. But just know that if you accidentally do something like this, don't take it out. Just go ahead, trim it right down to where it needs to be trimmed, and you're good to go. I'm leaving about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm simply going to finish, and all I'm doing is, like I said, I'm just going in to about 1/4 or a 1/2 inch away from that zigzag seam all the way around. Doesn't have to be perfectly clean. It can be as clean as your OCD wants it to be. Make sure you check underneath as you do it. You want to be real careful not to accidentally nab your quilt top. These are my favorite scissors for doing any type of this stuff. These are my Karen K. Buckley's. They are the best. I think there's 4 or 5 different scissors that she has. My little red-handled ones when I'm doing handwork or working at the long arm are my favorites for that, but these are wonderful just when you're trimming. They last forever. I just think they're amazing. Let me see here. Okay. Get some of those tips off of there. Make sure not to nail my top. Good enough for who it's for, which is me. All right. So now I've got that all done all the way around. I am now going to flip it over and set it aside for a minute because we're going to talk about my background. Now, as I said, with this particular art piece, I decided that I'm going to use this velvet, I've labeled my top because with velvet, you have to watch the nap, and the nap is proper going down this way. So I want to make sure that my top is up here. Now, this was wide velvet, so it's pieced together right in the middle. I think it's like 50 or 60. This is oversized based on what I need. So what I'm going to do is I know where my seams are for my top. I'm going to smooth that out. Get it kind of sort of in place. This one. Okay, so I'm going to line that up with that seam in the middle because that is the center. That is the center. Now I'm going to grab my tape measure. And I am going to center it long ways. Okay. 19.5. Well, darn. I better go buy a lottery ticket, that's right. All right. So I've got this in place. Now notice what I'm doing. My seam down the center here is lined up with the seam that's under there. So what I'm going to do now is grab my pins. I'm going to put one there. Actually, no. I know that that's where I want to be. Sorry about that, folks. And I also, whoops. All right, let me move this chair out of the way. We're in our tight space right now, our stash area, because of the big table. So I'm trying to maneuver around that. What I'm going to do now is I want to line my seam up with that center. Now that velvet on the back is actually going to be cut away because I'm going to follow the same process. What I'm just doing right now is I'm simply making sure not to stretch or distort. I'm laying that down. I'm just getting my placement. And I'm going to pin, keeping this seam on this seam because that is the center as I go about my squaring it out. Now the other thing that I want to make sure to do is I want to try to keep this fairly straight. Remember, we have triangles cut, and so we have a lot of bias potential here for distortion, and I just want to try to keep this as smooth and flat as I go through the process. This velvet is not stretchy. I know you can run across some velvet that's stretchy, and if you choose to use something like that, fine. Any stretchy, if you want to use a specialty fabric, is fine. You just want to make sure to keep it stable. Now what you could do, if you wanted to use a really cool type of fabric that you might find that has a little bit of stretch to it, is you may want to go ahead and before you sew it together to create your background, You might want to use some sort of iron-on stabilizer, one-sided of course. You wouldn't want to use something like a seam to seam 2 or anything like that because you got double side there. So you'd want to use like a Pellon of some sort, and you'd want to make sure to use a nice fine one. I find that the Pellon that you'd use to do t-shirt quilts would work really nice for any type of fabric that's easy to distort. Now once I get this middle lined up, and that's what I'm going to do right now, then I will go around. I will make sure to flatten this out a little more, and I'll work one half at a time, and we'll go ahead and we will utilize the acorn glue, and I will repeat the process for gluing this down. I want to make sure, because of this velvet, to keep the glue inside the edge under here. I want to make sure that I don't have any glue residue coming out. Even though it can be washed, and I did test this particular velvet. I took a chunk, seamed the edge, and I washed it in my washer every time I'd put a load of clothes in. And after 20 washes, it still looks great, still held up. So I know that I'm not afraid to utilize this for this type of application. But again, you would want to test whatever fabric you're going to use. If it's something that's going to be washed a lot, I don't think this is going to be washed a whole lot, but it is possibly going to be washed if something gets spilled on it. So I did want to do some testing with that. Now I'm going to come back here. Line that up. And I'm going to work my way up. I'm just simply going to get this in place. Now, another thing you could do, I suppose, would be to put a bead of the acorn glue down there, and then go ahead, put this in place, and actually press it in place that way. So as a matter of fact, why don't I give that a shot? We'll do both methods, just so you can see that there is more than one way to do something like this. So I have my acorn seam-aligned glue. I have the small one and the big one. I'm going to opt for the bigger one. And I'm going to put that right along. Only one line. I don't want to do, I'm not going right on that seam. I'm going to the side of it. I'm going to put this in place. Watching, I'm lining up my sew seam. With the seam of the fabric. Okay. And then right about there is where I run into the panel itself. So I'm going to go to there. Again, we are pressing, not ironing. I have tested the iron on the velvet, and it was just fine. I'm not going to go into the panel yet. So here we have pins. If you don't have the glue, that will work as well. And here we have, and I always like to put a little portable table right here to set my iron. Make sure that no little happy accidents are going to happen here. So now I'm going to pull this down there. And so I see it's attached to there. So now what I'm going to do is I want to find my center. I'm going to pull that so that I can start to line that up. Now, I ended here. I haven't glued this as of yet. I just wanted to place it just to get my bearings. Always take a minute with something like this. You know, the glue you can pull away, it's fine, and it'll unglue. That's the nice thing about the seam-aligned glue. But I do kind of want to just get my bearings. I've been away from everything for a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead, come back. I know that I've gone past the point where the seam is going to hook back in there. Get my bearings again. I know that this is my center here, but let me double check. Yep, so that's my center there. That is lined up on the seam, at least one way up. Now I want to smooth this out. Get that in place. Because I don't want any shift. I don't want any surprises. Glue is still wet. So this is the time. Make sure you don't have any tucks. It's real easy with the panel itself, just like that little issue right there. You can see it's real easy there to get some tucks. Double check my seam, readjust. Yay. There's always ways to do it. Like I said, you can use the pins, you can use the glue. Or there are probably other ways. I know we've got a lot of creative pieces out there. Find the way that works for you and do it. All right, so I'm up to here. I know that that's going to end right about there. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm simply going to come down. I know it's not going to go any higher than that. I think it is about up to there. There we go. Because I don't want it to go up above my piecing. Just because with the velvet, I know it'll wash right out, but. Let's not take any undue chances. Nice. Okay. Yep, it's attached. Good, good, good. All right, now let me reorganize my area a little bit here. Okay, so actually I'm going to do a little moving. Give me a minute. We'll be right back. Okay, so I have help. Amber's here to help me. So what we did is I lined this up with the seam. Because I had extra room, and if you have a table that isn't long enough, our table's long enough, but I don't want to move my sewing machine. What I did is I simply taped down the edges just to keep everything straight and copacetic. I've got everything lined up here. As we move up, on this end, I do not have that taped down. So I have my velvet smooth. I have my piece glued down the center. Now remember, we made this background bigger than what we need because we're going to square it and trim it once this part's done. So right now what I'm going to do is you could use masking tape. Right now I have packing tape. I'm going to line this up here. Obviously, just like stretching a mat, I want to smooth that out without stretching because I want this in place as we put down our guy there. Now remember, if you did your panel a rectangle, then it's a matter of just like regular borders, you're going to be sewing regular borders on. That's not what I've done. I made the oddball shape, which is why we're doing it this way. As I'm smoothing this, I'm looking down. Let's move the camera down here to here to make sure that I'm pulling any slack out so I don't have a lot of fullness underneath my pieced portion. All right, so Amber, I'll hand you some tape as you kind of, and your side looks pretty good. There you go, my dear. Okay, nice. So I've got that in place. We also want to remember that part is glued down. The next thing I'm going to do, now that I know that my velvet is stable, is I'm going to go ahead and Amber's going to help me. We know that here is glued. So she's going to leave her end be. I'm going to bring my end over to her, and what she's going to do, we're going to do two things. We want to line up these seams there. This will make sense in a minute, and then she's going to line up her edge to there, and I'm going to line this up going down so it's smooth. Why am I doing all of this? Because underneath this piece, I want to make sure that if I just laid it down and did around the outer edges, it could be distorted on the inside. Doing this is going to give me a much more stable and square piece, I feel. So I'm just going to go right here, put a bead of this glue. Now remember, when we tack this down, when I go to trim, once we sew around, which I believe will be the next part, I think this is definitely going to be a new two-parter. I'm going to go ahead. Now we're going to gently just bring it over, keeping everything in place. We'll make sure not to move it too much. Okay, we don't want to. Now, do you see what Amber's doing? She's scooching. We want to be careful not to scooch it out of how we had it in position. But we want to be able, of course, to scooch just a little bit. And now, so we're on that line. And so we're going to continue doing each line. Press. I want to double check. Yep, there we are. I see my glue coming through. I don't want to push it too much. Remember, this acorn will come out. Okay, so just how Amber was doing it, she's going to keep it smooth. Now, is there going to be a little bit of fullness possibly in here? Maybe a little, but not a lot. Or I could turn the iron. You know, sometimes having a camera on makes you a little stupid, right? Hey, be nice. Now again, I'm not worried about this that's coming up. That will come out. Now, once I get that in place, then very simply, let me find my place for my iron. I will flip this back. We'll do the same thing. So what Amber's going to do is we'll come one more this way. We don't have to do a ton. We're just doing a basic stable, but every other row, yeah, I'd say. So we'll line everything up. And again, what am I checking? I am checking, Mr. Ritchie, if you want to bring that in a little closer. I am checking this seam right here to line up, this seam to line up, these seams to line up. We want to line that up the best we can. Now remember, we're working with some bias, so not everything is always going to be perfect, but this is going to be the way that we can get it as close to perfect as we possibly can. And once I finish this side, then I would flip this around or go to the other side, whatever works for you, whatever table or surface you have. I've done this on a wood floor, making sure that I clean the wood floor very well, or hard floor, linoleum, whatever. Now we're going to just simply do that. We're not going to scooch it too much, just a little. Get it down. And I'm just going to feel, make sure that I haven't shifted. Yep, thanks. There it is. Find my telltale line. Now, once I get this side down, and that's as far as I'm going to go, is right here to this, I now feel pretty confident that I have it pretty well square and in place. And once I square it afterwards, again, this is for our oddball shaped pieces, then I can go ahead and do my edge. And this glue, another reason I love this glue, because when we actually sew around the edge and I go and I trim on the inner part, that glue will come loose. That will be when I want to take a little bit of Dawn and a light bristle toothbrush and go over these little guys if there's any glue residue, and that will come right off. That is the nice thing about the glue. Okay, I'm going to turn that iron off now. Okay, so up here, we'll do the flip, do the glue, do the pressing, come down here, do all the way to the middle down there, and then that'll be stable. I can either pull it this way, go on the other side, repeat that same exact process for the other side, and then when we come back for our next episode, we will go ahead, we will sew it down with the monopoly, and then we'll trim away the excess, and then we'll do a final hanging of the actual quilt top. So there we go. Almost there, folks, with our piece. All right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Again, we've got one more episode and then we're there. And again, thanks for the patience for our month that we were away and prepping for our quilt show and all the fun COVID stuff we did and all that sort of thing. So as always, take care of yourself, take care of each other. We'll see you on the next episode of this wonderful piece along. Goodbye, everybody.